All right, we are live. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris, and this is my channel. We love comics. Hopefully, you are ready to learn a little bit here when it comes to your protective rights. When it comes to, we're going to talk about comic books today, but basically any kind of purchases that are done on eBay. I had an interesting comment on one of the videos that I did, and I want to explain this because it seems like there are some people out there that may not know how protected they are. So I'm going to go over a bunch of things because, unfortunately, I'm a little bit of an expert on what to do when you get damaged items that arrive because I buy from eBay. I've been buying on eBay for um, almost since the beginning of when it opened, and I've had to return lots of things due to sellers' neglect and things like that. So you are more protected than you might even be aware of. So hopefully this video will help you. So I want to welcome all the people that are just coming in to start listening to this. Today is New Comic Book Day, so hopefully you'll be getting your new comics and having a fun time doing it. It's 6:14 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 3rd of May 2017. And I want to go over the comment that was left because I did a video earlier today, and if you haven't had the opportunity to check it out, I hope you do, where I had a comic book that was basically in an envelope that was twice the size necessary. It had no cardboard protection at all. It arrived totally damaged, and I will be getting my money back. I'm not worried about that. But a person, and I'm going to give a shout out to this person. Their name is Marshall Neal, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. They write in their comment, just happened to me. I guess and it probably happens to a lot of people, especially if you order things in the mail. Said, except the post office told me they had done it. They brought a new person in to help them, and he bent it and stuffed it in my box. Can't get my money back either because it was first class. The post office admits to it, then does nothing. Okay, so hopefully you purchased it on eBay. I can only really talk about eBay because it's probably going to vary when it comes to other places that you purchase from on their return guarantees. But let's assume most people, especially here, are buying comic books, and most of the time they're getting them from places like eBay. Now, there are a lot of sellers out there that either purposely don't care or they just don't know, because we cannot assume that just because somebody is selling a comic book that they love it the same way that we might. So it could be somebody where they're just, cleaning out their garage, found a couple of comic books, think they can get some money and just want to sell them. There are some people who just, they could have just gotten married and their spouse doesn't want them to, take up all this extra space, and they say get rid of stuff. There's many different reasons, so we can't assume. But you'll see a lot of times on eBay profiles on their auctions, they'll say things like, no refunds, no returns, sold as is. Well, it's nice that they say that, but there is a responsibility of a seller that even if they're not aware of, like they say when it comes to law, ignorance of the law is no excuse. Now, obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to have everything down pat, but there are some basics that will protect you. Now, when it comes to shipping a comic book or anything, when you order something online, you're assuming that the seller will take the necessary care to protect your item so it arrives in the very same way that you saw it and purchased it. This should be a given. So this is one of the reasons why when I make a purchase, even if it's a $5 purchase, I always message the sellers on eBay and explain to them how to protect the comic or anything. So this could be based on anything. And I tell them to please put several pieces of cardboard, very thick pieces of cardboard on either side. So this way it protects it from being damaged. Now, if a seller chooses to ignore that, and they decide, I'm just going to put it in an envelope because I'm sure you've heard this like I've heard many times. They'll say, oh, well, I do this all the time. And that definitely infuriates me when they say that, because that's like playing Russian roulette, and you have a chamber with 100 empty chambers and one chamber with the bullet. You could pull that trigger several hundred times and never hit the bullet. But it only takes the one time to cause yourself, some problems. So let's assume that the person had a as is sales, no refunds, no returns, no exchanges, no nothing. Puts all this stuff on there. Let's say it's a 9.8 graded comic, and they decide to put it in a manila envelope with no protection, and they send it out in pristine condition. And the post office damages the comic. Now, who's responsible? Well, ultimately, the person that did the damage would be the responsible one, but since that's a government entity, good luck trying to sue them, because a lot of times, like this person said, if they don't want to deal with you, forget it. You're going to go through such red tape, you're never going to see the light of day with anything, and they make it extremely difficult. So the idea is to take advantage of the eBay fire protection program. Now, especially if you don't have to do it, but especially if you notify the seller ahead of time and say, this is how I want it sent to protect it, and they choose to ignore it, then you have evidence to show that you tried to help the person be able to send the product better. But it doesn't even matter, because if you ordered that book, and like I said, let's assume it was a 9.8, it was ungraded, and it is sent to you, and the post office man decides, I'm going to fold this in half and shove it into the mailbox. It did not arrive in the way that you purchased it. Now, a seller could rant all they want and say, well, it's not my fault that happened. But then you have to think, is it their fault? Because if they would have put proper packaging to the point where a comic cannot bend, or whatever item you have cannot bend, the post office worker would have never had the opportunity or the ability to be able to fold it and place it into the mailbox. So that is where there's responsibility from the seller, and it will protect you, because all you have to do is when you make a file claim to eBay, tell them that the comic did not arrive, or the item did not arrive in the same condition you purchased it, and it is the seller's responsibility to make sure the item is protected. Now, let's say the seller did everything right. They put 5 pieces of cardboard on either side, they wrapped it in bubble wrap, they put it in a box, and it gets destroyed anyway due to the, post office or UPS or Federal Express's fault. Then you would have to go through to the post office or the carrier. But the whole point is, did the seller use, to the best of their ability, ample amount of protection to where they are no longer held responsible? So this is where you have to be careful. Now, the person that left that comment, I don't know, you didn't say whether you purchased it on eBay or not, but if you purchased it on eBay and they sent it in an envelope that is minimal protection at best, they did not in good faith try and protect your item. So they're responsible for what happens. So even though they'll say, well, it wasn't my fault, it was the post office. Well, if they put it, like in the video I showed earlier today, in a paper-thin manila envelope with no protection, then it increases the risk of it getting damaged. If they were to have put 5 or 6 pieces of cardboard and put it in a proper envelope, and maybe put it in, for example, a top loader, or put it in a box, well, they would not have been able to be stuffed into a mailbox or damaged. Or at least it would be incredibly difficult to have it happen. So when it comes to especially eBay, a lot of especially newer buyers tend to get very intimidated, because you will have some sellers that will just say, oh, I do this all the time, it's never happened before. And they'll say things like, oh, if you read my auction, it says no returns. Well, that's why they have things like lemon laws. It's to protect a buyer, because as is online is not the same as is when you go to a store. When you go to a physical store, you're able to inspect an item. Online, you cannot do that. You're going by the faith of the seller. And if they provide minimum pictures and they don't answer questions, it doesn't matter if they say no refunds, no returns. Because I have had to return over the the years, multiple years of being on eBay, over 100 times I've had to return items because they arrived in a worse condition than they were when I purchased them, or it wasn't mentioned, certain things weren't mentioned. And that's another thing. Let's say, for example, you buy a comic book and they only show the front and back of the comic, and you don't know what's inside it because they don't show the pictures, they don't answer any questions, so you just take a chance. And let's say you get that book and you find out the centerfold is detached. Now, they cannot use the excuse, well, I didn't know, because it's the seller's responsibility to give what is called full disclosure, which means they have to tell you all of the defects to the best of their ability. Now, obviously, they don't have to take out a microscope and give you, millicentimeters and, the most minute defects. But they have to make it to where they give you full confidence that you are pretty much aware of what you are buying without them hiding anything from you. And using the excuse of, I didn't know, it does not protect them. Because how difficult would it have been for a seller to take the comic book out of the bag and board and examine it? How much more difficult would it have been to take extra pictures? So if you're thinking about selling, this is the advice I would always give to people. There is no such thing as too much information. So if you give, like, let's say I don't know how many exact pictures you could take. I think it's between 8 to 12. Let's assume it's just an even number 10. Why people only take 1 or 2 pictures when they have the ability to take 10 is beyond me. Now, obviously, if it's a graded book and it's graded 9.8, there's not much you have to show. But if you give full disclosure, and the person just says, oh, I just changed my mind, they're not going to be protected. So I've had many times where I've ordered a comic book and it was not arriving in the same way as when I purchased it. And they can rant and rave, they can say, oh, no returns, they can say this, that, and the other thing. I have gotten returns on my books 100% of the time. And I've had some pretty rotten sellers. Some that first try and ignore it, some try and blame it on me. Some use the excuse of, oh, I mail things like this out all the time. Some of them try and use intimidation because it may work on some other sellers. So it's like anything in life, knowledge is power. So don't let them intimidate you. And the more information you ask to a seller, the more you protect yourself. And we have a comment really quick, so I want to just read this. Comic Nerd 1997, and thank you for watching, I appreciate this, says, I always try to take as much pictures as I can when it's raw books. I agree, less pictures with graded books. I like to see the label and the full look of the book. Exactly. When you have a graded book, you want to show the front and back because you want to make sure there are no cracks in the case. And if there is, even if there's a hairline fracture, you want to mention it. Because I'll give you another example with that. I had one of the books I bought that was graded was a 9.8 New Mutants 98 signed by Stan Lee. It was a CGC book. I've shown it in videos before. Now, the way the person took the picture, they put such a close-up on it that you couldn't see the outer edge of the casing. And he also had it in a frame. So he had this thing probably up on his wall, so you couldn't see the outer edge of the casing of the book. And I've seen many people do that, where they'll take a book that's kind of too close in, so you can't really see the edges, because on a comic book, that's where most of the damage tends to be. So when I got it, there was a little bit of a crack in the top left-hand corner of the casing. Now, not enough to where it could have, switched a label, but something that definitely, if somebody else, had to put money into getting a new casing, it's going to cost money. So that's money I should not have to pay because I wasn't fully disclosed about that. And this seller tried to give me an attitude and said, there's no way they could have done it. There's no way that happened, and accused me of doing it. Like, for some reason, I would take a very valuable book and want to crack it open and just hit the tip of it for some reason. Like, that would make my comic more valuable. And even if I took them at face value, which a lot of these people, unfortunately, I don't, because they all tend to have the same story, and there's always a reason for excuses. They said, I'm not going to do anything. Told them I would go through eBay. And we ended up settling where the person finally decided that they would give me a $100 return on the investment. And I thought that was fair. So if you negotiate with people and be civil with them, like with me, when I deal with eBay sellers, there's an old saying that says, kill them with kindness. So even when you're mad, one thing I've learned is never, ever comment on a seller the moment you receive a book, because you'll be based on emotion, you'll be totally angry, and even if it's justified, if you curse and scream at a seller, they're not going to work with you. So the more you actually communicate with them in a civil way and understand, maybe it was just a mistake. It can happen. There have been many people, when I talk to them, they actually thanked me and said they weren't aware of, comic books having to be sent in a certain way. Because, like I said, maybe they don't love comics like we do. And they appreciate the education. So you have more protection than you will realize. But it's like anything. If you don't do anything to fix it, they get away with it. That's like somebody stealing your car, and you look out the window and you see your car riding away, and you just decide to not call the cops. Well, it's bad that the person stole the car, but if you did nothing about it, they get away with it. So it's the same thing when it comes to eBay. And again, it doesn't have to be comics. It could be anything. It's the seller's responsibility to make sure that your item, whatever it is that you purchase, arrives in the same way it was when you purchased it. And it does not matter if it gets damaged in the middle of delivery, if the seller did not give, to the best of their ability, the ample protection that that item needed. Just using a thin piece of cardboard on a comic is not sufficient, even if they think it is. And unfortunately, they do it because it saves them money. Now, here's the ironic part, and I hope any eBay seller out there hears this. Because a lot of them do it because it saves them money. Obviously, the heavier a package is, the more the delivery cost is going to be. But here's the funny part. A lot of them use minimal protection to save money in hopes that it will arrive like it's done dozens of times before. But if you have, for example, a $100 comic book that you sold, and you use the same minimal protection that you've used dozens of times before, and they got them perfectly fine, and that book arrives damaged and is now ruined, that buyer is going to get his money back or her money back. You are going to get your comic now in less valuable condition than it was when you sent it. So how much money did you save? So again, it's like playing Russian roulette. So please make sure you learn your ability to protect yourself when you are a buyer. And what I always say is be honest. Don't make up stuff. Don't be dishonest. And don't try and take advantage. Like when I talk about situations where, it's a minimal amount of damage, where I could still be happy with the comic, but I should be compensated for the fact that the value is now lowered. I don't say, I want a 90% refund. I say a little bit. So this way I'm happy with the fact that I'm being compensated for the now reduced condition of the book, because a lot of times people are buying books for investment purposes, and we know every little hairline scratch damages the comic's value. So all you ask for is a respectable amount of compensation. And if a book is so damaged it's not even worth having anymore, you have every right to return it, as long as you report it in the proper amount of time. Now, generally, eBay has a 30-day period. PayPal, I believe, gives you either 3 to 6 months. If anybody knows that specifically, post it in the comment section, whether you're watching this live or watching it later. But they give you a longer amount of protection. So even if the eBay protection of 30 days is gone, if you purchased using PayPal, you still have additional time. So don't assume that just because you missed out on the 30 days for eBay for whatever reason, that you're no longer protected. And this is another bit of advice I could give people is, especially if you're buying comic books, as soon as you get a book and it's not in a graded condition, in other words, if it's not in a CGC, CBS, or PGX casing, take the book out of the bag and board, provided they give you one, some don't. Look throughout the entire book. Because if you decide to just say, oh, I got my book, let me put it away in a comic book box, and then a year later you decide to check it out, and you find out that the centerfold is actually detached, well, there's no more protection for you. So the idea is research all you can about stuff. Learn your protections. Don't be intimidated, and know that a seller is responsible for the product until it reaches your hands and you're satisfied with the transaction. If there's any damage in between and it could have been prevented by the seller using more responsibility and more protection, well, then they are at fault, despite what they say to you. But if they intimidate you and you do nothing, then they get away with it. So don't let them do that anymore. So I want to thank Marshall Neal for their comment to inspire me to do this video. Hopefully that person will watch this video and many others. The one thing I will ask is, if you find these kind of things valuable, if you think this information can help anybody, especially if you know anybody that sells or buys on eBay, share the link to this video when it processes. It usually takes about a half hour after the live show is over. Giving it a thumbs up is also a benefit. It helps get this out there. And don't take advantage of people if you're a seller, and understand your rights as a buyer. The idea is, if you do a transaction the right way and you do the best of your ability, making sure that a product is received the way it was sent out, some things are beyond your control. But if you do the bare minimum and the excuse is, I do this all the time, that doesn't hold water. But as a buyer, know your rights. And hopefully this will help you a little bit more. So if you appreciate it and you want to give it a thumbs up, I always love the help. And a quick shout out again to Comic Nerd 1997 for his statement. Comic Lover Omega said, great advice as always. Thank you for being here. And Jess Wilowski says, hey. So hey back to you. Everybody else that's watching, I always appreciate you guys. Check out my other videos. Hit subscribe. Hit the like button. And remember, don't hit the person next to you, because that's not nice. So that's it, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris. This is We Love Comics. And remember, it's not you. It's not I. It's We Love Comics. Have a great day.